Welcome to another edition of our prep football video preview. Gabe Liston, sports editor of the Gazette, joined by Richard Walker and Philip Gardner. Just 2 weeks left in the regular season. Obviously some big matchups down the stretch, and we're going to go over a few things that are going on in the world of high school football around here. First question is, we kind of know who's in and who's out for the most part, but who's, maybe a team that has a chance to play their way up in stature as far as the playoffs go? You can start with that, Phil.
I think you look at the Big South. Huss controls his own destiny as far as perhaps getting a higher playoff seed in their position right now, and that's because they play Forest View this week. If Huss is able to pull off what would probably be an upset, they could claim that number 2 3A seed from the Big South, which would be big for them. Right now they're 4th place in the conference, but they can be seeded among the number 2s in that 3A bracket, so they've got a lot to play for this week. And of course, they'd also have to take care of business against Ashbrook the following week.
I'd agree with Phil. And then you look at the Southwestern 2A, 3A, Kings Mountain and RS Central basically play for the conference championship, because I just don't see how Kings Mountain would lose to Burns the last week of the year. And then the Southern Piedmont 1A, 2A is really a dogfight. You got Bessemer, Lincoln, and South Iredell all right there together. I saw Lincoln play South Iredell. Phil saw Bessemer play, I guess, Lincoln Monday. And those were competitive, close games, a play or two either way could have swung the difference in the game. And as you get into the playoffs, being, as you said, using Huss as a perfect example, the difference between being a number 2 team going into the playoffs versus a 3 or 4 team going to the playoffs is home games, less challenging playoff brackets. It makes all the difference in the world. And as I look at it, I kind of feel like the Southern Piedmont 1A, 2A this year is a little bit like the Big South 3A, 4A was a year ago, and that they've beat each other up so much, and they've gotten everybody else in the league. They play at such a high level week to week that I would be surprised if that league doesn't shine really well in the playoffs, and that's going to have everything to do for those teams with how they go into the playoffs, where they're seated, and it really kind of comes down to matchups and how they suit. East Lincoln seems kind of situated as the number 1 seed. I would say North Lincoln's probably pretty well situated at the number 2, but then after that, you're really talking a wide open race.
A team that didn't play last week, South Point, they're back in action at home Friday night against North Gaston. How do you feel like at this point of the season an off week affects a team that's playing that well?
I think they look forward to it, because when you know you're going to the playoffs like South Point does, you look at it as kind of that week off to kind of get geared up for the playoffs. And in their case, the Crest game. No disrespect to North Gaston, but I can see no scenario in which South Point wouldn't win that game with ease this week. Let's face it, in Belmont, all the talk is about Crest next week. I know North Gaston's on the schedule this week, but it's all about next week. And the way you kind of sell it is you have a 9-week season, a week off, and then you've got your last 2 regular season games, one of which is going to determine the conference championship, and then the playoffs. Now, if you're a bad team, I've always heard coaches of teams that have nothing to play for. It really makes it challenging for you, because what are you selling late in the year? Like, for instance, under the old format, Ashbrook would hate being off this week. But now they still know they get a chance to go to the playoffs, a chance to get people healthy. But you make a valid point. When you're playing well, often you don't want to take that week off because you kind of fall out of those game time habits. But I just think the way that the high school football is played today, with the kids being bigger, stronger, faster, we were reminded by that last week with the situation with the player at East Gaston. You need a break just physically to kind of get the batteries recharged.
If you're South Point, you're thinking, we've got 16 games to play, because they think they're going to go all the way up to the state championship. If that's the case, their bye week is almost right in the middle of the season for them. And so I think it's pretty good timing for them. And they've had a nice stretch here, 8-1. North Gaston should be a real easy game for them. And if they have any rust coming off that bye week, they'll be able to shake that off against North Gaston, and that'll be their tune-up for Crest the next week. But as far as getting better, this team's been on a roll. They've been playing really great defensively. Obviously, we know what the offense can do. I think if there's one thing they can improve, it's the passing game. And that has to be a concern going into this time of year, because if they get behind in a ball game, 2nd round, 3rd round of playoffs, that could be troublesome, because they've not been able to move the ball through the air very well.
I think a couple of weeks ago I asked these guys, if they could start a team with any specific player, who would it be? And they went with offensive guys. This week I'm going to kind of switch that to the defensive side of the ball. If you could choose a defensive player in the area, who would that be?
We'll have to go with Seth Hazelton, Forest View linebacker. Probably the hardest hitting guy I've seen this year. He gets at the ball. He's got a nose for the football. He knows how to find the ball carrier, and he hits hard. I mean, he punishes the ball carrier, and he makes you think twice about running his area again. So, there's a reason Forest View's had a really good, solid defense this year, and he's been a big part of it.
And I would pick a young player from Crest, a freshman named Raheem Ledbetter, who's a defensive back, may become an offensive player. He was at middle school, but he's been a real sure tackler. I think there's a highlight of him already out there. It's almost become a YouTube phenomenon of a terrific hit he had earlier in the year. Really seems to be a sure tackler and a fast closer. It's rare for us to talk about Crest without talking about Division I talent, and this year their seniors don't seem to be it. But Raheem Ledbetter, as a freshman, would seem to be the kind of player that down the road I can see being a big-time college recruit for a lot of people looking at. And as we've seen over the years, Crest has had plenty of those, particularly on the defensive side of the ball.
Good job this week. That'll wrap it up, and we'll see you next week. If you have any questions that you want to submit to these guys, feel free to send them to sports@GastonGazette.com, and we'll see if we can get them answered. We'll see you next week.